Okay, so welcome to part two of the finished art tutorial. I thought I'd split it up just because the first video was already getting quite long. So I thought I'd split it up so you have a chance to have a marker and you can come back to the bits that if you're halfway through it, you can know that this is the second half of that particular aspect of the tutorial. So what we were going on about, or what I was going on about in the last part, was the embellishment. That's what we're up to in terms of the checklist. So if you were up to here, this is where we're at in terms of the checklist. The embellishment was what I was going through. Obviously the embellishment I've put if needed just because you obviously might not need it. But what I was saying last time was you need to set up your own separate spot color. So in this case I've chosen a varnish to do over the top of the brand mark. So I've indicated that as a yellow spot color, just because it was one of the colors that I hadn't used in my die line colors. Set up a new layer, copied the elements that I wanted across to that new layer, and colored it with the varnish spot color. And then on top of that, I also created a new spot color for the markup. Now the markup, it refers to, if you were following along with the last bit of the tutorial, the markup refers to the elements that are being told to the printer. So to make things like crystal clear for them so that they don't feel like they're stabbing in the dark or that they get something wrong and you were like, well, how come you didn't know? And this is explicitly stating it to them so that they don't get it wrong. And the reason that we put it up on the markup panel, so you put your markup on that particular layer, is because the markup panel itself is for the printer. So its primary purpose is for the printer, so the printer knows what this job is, how many colors, etc., printing process, all that. So to put this on there is obviously part and parcel with telling the printer this extra bit of information. Now, if we go back to the checklist, the next section is the markup. So the reason that it's a separate section is because obviously as part of the embellishment, it's important to know and tell the printer, hey, this is actually not just a yellow color just for part of the design. It is a spot color that indicates where you need to put that spot varnish. With the markup, so just the generic markup, such as this point here, that's referring to anything else. So in this case, this particular student has done spot colors in his design. So you can see here that if I go to my separations preview, got the overprint preview turned on, and I toggle on and off where the spot colors are, so the PMS spot colors for the design and not the die line based spot colors, you can see there that they're obviously being colored in the spot colors that he's created. So if I was wanting to create markup, a good method for the markup would be to do exactly that and draw a little line off to the side using our new markup spot color, and on the markup layer drawing a line from where the PMS colors are to indicate what colors are colored what. So it would say something like large strip printed PMS 021, which is that orange one there. And then also you can see in there that he's got mountains. So I would also indicate that because that's a very important detail. Those mountains are set to a percentage of the spot color. So they might be 60, 70% of the 100% spot color, the PMS 021. So for the printer, that's really important to know that they actually need to be visible. Otherwise, that whole panel might be just printed as 100% 021. C. So if you indicate that this panel prints 100% but the mountains print 60%, that would be good markup. That would really clearly tell the printer that's what those are. And again, with these mountaineering tools, you would draw a little markup off the side there to indicate that they were printing as the, 7599C. So you would indicate that off the side there. In this case, he's also got a perforated line, which he hasn't indicated with the spot color. So as you guys remember back to your die line tutorial, I said to, if you're doing perforations, make sure that they're set to the dotted line, so not the dashed line, dotted line cyan spot color. So you would then potentially put a markup line and a bit of annotation there, or markup text to say dotted line indicates perforation. Yeah, so something like that. So have a look around your design, and if you see anything that seems ambiguous, like if you look at it and you're like, it makes sense to me, but it wouldn't make sense to somebody else, add some markup to it. Yeah, so make sure you add that markup to elements that are a bit ambiguous. With your colors, additional PMS colors, as I said, if you've used spot colors in your design, make sure that you put them in your markup panel. So don't just put them in your swatch palette and color them in your job. Make sure that they're also down in the markup. So you've actually got almost 2 or 3 indications of the same spot color. You've got it labeled in your swatches because you've chosen them from the color book library, your Pantone color book library. If you remember back to the first part of this finished art tutorial, I was referring to the swatch library, color books, and then whether your job was a coded or uncoded job. You choose your colors, you turn them to a spot color, and then that way it's labeled over here, so such as the ones that he's got here. It's colored in the design, and it's also in the markup panel down the bottom. So you've got those 3 instances of how the colors are being shown. So make sure that if you're using additional Pantone colors, that you label them and you add them. If you're not using them, don't even stress about this one. You can just leave that checklist point alone. No unnecessary colors. Now this goes back to the same as the die line. If you remember from the die line tutorial, I was saying to you to get rid of all the unnecessary colors from your swatch palette. So to do that, just as a refresher, you go to the drop-down menu in your swatch palette in the top right corner. You go select all unused, which will obviously select all the colors that aren't being used in the job. And in your case, if you've still got all the default colors there in your swatches, it'll highlight, you know, a pretty large list, and then you just trash them. So you just delete those. In this case, he's got other ones that haven't been selected as part of the unused, which would be these grays here, because I don't believe he's using them in the job. He might be, it'll just depend. Sometimes under the folders it doesn't properly select them, so you might need to manually delete those. I've also listed in the checklist as part of that, use same swatches. Now what I mean by that is if you had coloured, say for instance, if he'd coloured these mountaineering tools one colour, and then say coloured these other mountaineering tools out of CMYK, that wouldn't be using the same swatches. Again, if you were to say use this particular text here might be coloured in white, and this particular text here might be coloured with 10% K, so it might be just a really, really light grey. I would make sure that you go through and check everything that's supposed to be the same colour are the same colour. If you're using greens, make sure they're all the same green. Unless, of course, you're obviously doing gradients and there's different shades for different elements, and it makes sense in terms of the design concept, like it's all there. Other than that, if you're doing, if you've got the same elements on different sides of the pack and they're different colors, you'll be marked down for that. So you need to make sure that they are all the same color in your swatch palette, so not just different, slightly different color breakdowns for what you want to be the same color. And if you need some assistance with that, you can always just shoot me an email. The colors, need to make sure that the file's set up as CMYK and not RGB. It's pretty easy to check that. Your die line file should have already been set up that way, so it should already be default. But if you look up the top here and the naming convention, you'll see it's got CMYK in brackets and overprint preview. The CMYK just lets you know that the file's CMYK. If it was set to another color palette, such as say RGB, you would need to make sure that very early on you change that, because what might happen is if this had been set to RGB and he'd done all his design and then he realized it was RGB and not CMYK and he changed it, it might mess up with all your colors, and there's a lot of difficulties associated with finish arting that. So make sure early on that you check to see that that CMYK is set to CMYK and this file is CMYK, not just not RGB or not lab or any other grayscale or whatever. So yeah, make sure that it's set to CMYK. All fonts above 5 points. So if you remember back to our back of pack, make sure that you set everything to above 5 points. So nothing below 5 point. You'll be marked down if it's below 5 point. A good way to check to see if something is below 5 points is often you can just select, if they're all the same type, the way I do it is I just select slabs of copy. If there's different weights and sizes and stuff in there, sometimes it might play with it. But if I've selected this and you look up here where your character options are, it's all set to 11 point, so it's fine. I usually go to the smallest thing first. So in this case, it looks like it's this text over here showing the company contact details. I select that. That says 8 point. That's fine. Doesn't look like there's anything on here that's smaller than that, but I will be going through to make sure that all of it is above 8 point. And if it's not, you'll be marked down for it. Even if it's a small pack, you need to figure out a way to make it work. So as much as possible, even if your existing pack shows a smaller type on it and it seems like it's below 5 point, I want you to get in the practice of making sure that it's set to 5 just for the purposes of RMIT and good finished art. So yeah, at the moment it seems like his smallest font is 8 points, which is fine. So that's all good. So check yours and make sure everything's above 5. No spelling or grammar mistakes. It seems like after you've looked at your job 1,000 times, it's still very easy to overlook things. The easiest way to check for stuff like that is to actually make sure that you've got your artwork layer on. So obviously if all your text is contained in your artwork layer, make sure it's unlocked and that it's visible. Just go up to type. Oops. There we go. Sorry, edit. Go to edit and go check spelling, which is also Command I. So if you go Command I and you start that one off, you can see whether or not it's any of the words are spelt incorrectly. Now you'll find that my one's set to UK English, yours might be US, so make sure that it's consistent. So for instance, one of the common ones that pops up is things like the difference between US and UK spelling. So colour, COLOUR, or that's the UK spelling, or the American spelling would be COLOR. Now, you can have one or the other, don't have both. So if you've got colour written 3 or 4 times on the pack and you do 2 of them with the OUR spelling and 1 of them with the OR spelling, or you'll get marked down for your spelling. So you need to make sure it's consistent. The point of checking grammar and spell checking is not just for the spelling itself, in terms of whether it's spelt correctly, but also in terms of being consistent. So you've not missed out on things like, say for instance, if you've copied from the old pack the the existing pack's brand name into, say, company contact details, or you've missed it, you've just like copied it across and not read it properly, you'll find that some of this stuff is still evident in there. So you need to go through and make sure that instead of saying something like Radiant Washing Powder Proprietary Limited, it says the company name that you've got there, and that all counts to the spelling and grammar. So you need to go through not only with the spell checker, which you can get from edit check spelling and go through that way, but also go through and check it manually to see whether or not there's any words that just seem awkward or seem fine in terms of sentence, but if you read it, you're like, oh, that wasn't picked up by the spelling generator. So make sure you check both of those. Typesetting. Most of you are familiar with how to typeset. You know how to typeset. The biggest ones that I've got there as like the to keep a particular eye on are the widows and orphans. Widow is obviously when you've got a paragraph or even if you've got a line of text. So let's just zoom in on this just for the purposes of explaining this. If you had a widow, it's text one word on a line by itself. So if I'd done something like this, and solution was on a line by itself, other than leaving a big gap there and looking awkward, it's also leaving a widow there. And same for the orphan. So an orphan is the same thing, but at the start of the paragraph. So if you've got that and you've got a line of text or a paragraph or something with one word at the top, that's considered an orphan, and it's only part of a paragraph. If it's actually, like, say for instance, this particular thing actually just say it was written like this, and it had care, wash hands after use. Care is not an orphan because it's almost a separate paragraph. That's your heading. So that's not considered part of this. It's if it was in this paragraph here as part of this typesetting and you had it set up like something like that, then that would be considered an orphan and it would be poorly typeset. So make sure you check through for things like that. Also things like just obvious things like checking the leading and the kerning between characters. The more important things are brand names, variant names, because they're large type. And so often, see, I would say that there's a huge gap between the O and the W of the eco washing here. That needs to be closed in a little bit. And even I'd say between the G and the P here is relatively okay, but it could work with a little bit of refining. But generally speaking, you want to make sure that you typeset the larger characters even more so than the smaller characters. You can get away with a bit more in your body copy and smaller lines of copy, but the larger copy definitely needs to be properly typeset. And since you've done type quite a lot, I would argue that you should be good enough at the typesetting by now to be able to make it work for you. So go through, check all that, make sure your typesetting's all up to standards. You don't need to worry about setting up character styles or paragraph styles. Just make sure you manually typeset it and do a good job of it. Only English text. As I said, if you've spoken to me about using other languages, that's fine. If we haven't spoken and you end up copying across from your existing pack some international copy from other countries, then you'll get marked down for that. So make sure that you only keep the only English text in there. So English text because we're assuming that it's an English-speaking audience. No true type fonts. If you're using true type fonts, and it's, say, a variant name or a brand name, so a large bit of copy, you can outline it, but I won't accept true types that's been outlined as a large bit of body copy. So if this section here, for instance, on this job, had been outlined because it was done in a true type and you hadn't changed it across to another open type or PostScript font instead of a true type, you would get marked down for not leaving that as live text. So make sure that you go through and check to see if there's any true types that you change them as much as possible. And I know that I get a lot of questions with you guys. Well, why can't you use true types? What's wrong with true types? True type fonts aren't generally bad. Most of the time they're sourced from things like defont.com, and you'll find even in the industry, a lot of people will look at you sideways and go, there's nothing wrong with true types, go for it if you want to use it. The reason I'm telling you not to use it is because it's been typeset by people who don't know how to typeset, generally speaking. That's a very blanket statement, but generally speaking, fonts on defont.com have been distressed using existing typefaces, so ones that have been well designed. Then they've gone in and changed the characters around, turned it into something else, added a few more inflections and whatever, and then put it back up on the website. And that means that they've been poorly lettered, poorly kerned, and they haven't been designed properly. So the typefaces are pretty much dodgy versions of another typeface. So when using true types, often I say not to use it because I don't know if everybody's at the same level of typesetting as everyone else. So I insist that you don't use true types so that you know that when you are typesetting, using PostScript and OpenType fonts are the go-to fonts. Pixel graphics, all of these down here are referring to pixel graphics if you've got them. If you don't have them, you can just bypass this whole section. But generally speaking, pixel graphics, as I said before, you want to make sure that they're on a separate layer. So in this case, obviously this particular student has background. I'd advise you to label that one placed PSD if possible. Whereas this other student hasn't got any textures or anything in her work. Well, actually, no, I lie. I think she does. Yeah, so it looks like there's just a tiny, like these little bits here behind, I think it's Aristotle, are basically texture, so a very subtle light texture. So put those on a separate layer if they're in the background. Otherwise, because this is part of her artwork, that's okay for her to integrate into her artwork layer there. Just because it's tricky to try and balance all those layers. If she's got text on the top and block vector graphics behind it, better to just integrate it into the one. But if you're doing something like what this guy has, and he's got the background set to a texture, chuck that on a separate layer so that you can just go in and easily change it should you need to. So chuck that on a separate layer if needed. Pixel graphics, don't embed them. The easiest way to check to see if a graphic has been embedded is to bring up your window. Where is it? Should be links. Links, here we go. So mine was already up in the top right here, but everything in your links is in this section. It might look like this initially, where you've just got a series of images there, sort of showing you everything that's been placed into this job. But what you'll see if something hasn't been placed, now I'm just going to do this for the purposes of showing you what an embedded image looks like, but please don't do this. When you embed an image, and that's usually just because you'll copy and paste it across. Oh, whoops, hold up. Just let me unlock the layers first. Okay. Okay, so when you embed an image, it looks like this. You'll see this little funky icon over here of a picture of a square with a square in it, a triangle in it. And beside, if you see the links palette like this, you'll see a little, what looks like an arrow down the bottom that says show link info. If you show that, you'll see all the properties of that image, which is really handy. So you can see that the format says TIFF, but it's embedded. Now, if I go to one that isn't embedded, it says linked file in the parentheses. So don't do that. If you see an image and it's got the square with the little shapes inside it, that means it's been embedded, so you need to make sure that you relink it. And what you can do to relink it is to just select the image that you've got there, go down the bottom to where it says relink, and then find where the original image was located so that you can insert it. So if I see any embedded files, obviously you'll lose marks for that. So make sure that they're linked and not embedded. Few image links. Now that refers to what I was talking about before. In this particular guy's job, there we go, so it's embedded now. In this particular guy's job, if I just go to the outline mode now, you can see all of these like big squares. I'll turn off all these. Right, so all of these rectangles here with the X's through them indicate where he's got background images in there. So the placed pixel graphics placed in there. It's superfluous. There's too many in the background there. My advice would be to turn that into one. Because you can see, look at this section over here. He's got this image here in the tiny little area over here, when really if he'd done a background image that went across the entire background, that would have just meant that he'd had the one PSD, his links files would be reduced down so he didn't have 5 of the same file in the background there. So my advice is to make sure, if you're using pixel graphics, that you reduce the amount of image links in there. And that even goes for things like, say for example, you decided that you wanted to, say this little thing here, this little mountain that he's got here. Since that's a vector graphic, that's fine. But if you wanted to make that a pixel graphic, rather than placing that in as a separate pixel graphic, put it in the background image so that it all becomes the one. Same with these mountaineering tools. If he decided that he wanted to add texture to them or make them more photorealistic, he put them into the actual PSD file. So you've got this one, and this one, as well as this mountain, all in the background image. So you don't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 images in there. Just have them all as one background PSD, and you can have all your text over the top and any additional vector graphics as well. So try and reduce your pixel graphics to as few as possible. No low res or positional images. Again, if you go back to your links palette and select one of the images that you've got, say in your links palette there, drop down this menu, and as I said before, you'll see all of the details that you need. Now in this case, the PPI is 300. Perfect. That's exactly the print quality PPI you should be going for. And the scale is 100%. So where you can, as much as possible, make sure that the scale is always 100%, and every time make sure that all your images are 300 PPI. Also, make sure that the format is a TIFF or a PSD, so nothing else. No JPEG, no PNG, no low-res bitmap file, nothing other than a TIFF or a PSD linked file at 300 PPI and preferably scaled to 100%. The other thing too is to make sure that there is no transparency in your PSD file. The reason that is because at the printing end, it's really tricky to control transparencies. So as much as possible, keep your transparencies out of your pixel graphics if you're creating it. And the other thing too is to make sure that every single one of your linked files are CMYK. And again, you can actually see that over here. In this case, he set it up as a grayscale, which is okay. So his color space is grayscale instead of CMYK. That's fine. Grayscale just basically means that he's using K. So if I were to go to the overprint preview and I toggle on and off the K, you can see there that the background's just made totally up out of K, which is even better. So that's nice, clear, clean finished art because he's made sure that the colors are reduced to one plate and not 2, 3, 4 plates for just the background, which is supposed to be grey. So grayscale's okay if you want to use it. Generally speaking though, stick to CMYK. Okay, so that's everything with regards to the stuff contained in the file. Quickly looking at this, there's nothing else that I can think of that I might have potentially forgotten. It all looks pretty straightforward. So go back through that to make sure that you check all the details that I've gone into about all of those elements. I've got another little PDF that I'll quickly go through as well at the end, but just before I do, we'll go into the submission, so the next section. Make sure you've named all your files correctly. You will have seen on Blackboard that the naming convention is obviously the 3Design _ group A or B _ SA1 _ last name. So when you go through, name everything using that convention, but change them accordingly based on what it is that you're submitting. So for instance, the 3Design, your group, and your last name won't change, so they'll be the same on every one, but the SA1 might change to be presentation, or it might change to be concept journal. So change the SA1 on every single file that you're submitting to be whatever it is, so that they're all named consistently and in a single folder. Include a concept journal, so make sure that you submit a concept journal and a design presentation. So don't make one of them and assume that they satisfy both of them. You need to make a concept journal, which is your rich document containing your mood board, your marketing questionnaire, your inspiration images, some progress development in terms of sketches and design refinement material, as well as potentially some final layouts of the actual design itself. And then the design presentation will actually just be almost like a best of your concept journal. So then that way when you get up there and you present, it's just a smaller abridged version so that you're not going through pages and pages of stuff and potentially boring your client. So make sure you submit both of those separately and don't just do one assuming that it'll tick both boxes. Set up 2 separate files. Full-size color mock-up, we'll probably go through that when you go to print. You can print at RMIT. If you wish not to print at RMIT, there's plenty of other places around that offer the printing services. I won't go into what those are over this YouTube clip, just because I don't want to give preference to any other printing studio over any other. So we can go through that verbally in class if you wish to know a few places where you can get it printed. Live Illustrator file. So this refers to this document. So the live finished art Illustrator file with your all of the elements that are needed. So your markup panel, your job ticket, measurements, die line, etc., etc., etc. This refers to the live Illustrator file. And the other thing too is when I say live, it means live text. So you can see that when I hover over these, the text can be edited. Now it stands to reason that most what you actually set up will be live because you're obviously typing this copy in, other than potentially some of the brand name or variant name that you might have outlined because you might have sourced it from an online screenshot or something like that. Whatever it is that you've live traced, whatever it may be, you might have other elements that might be outlined or live traced. But generally speaking, live text should be live on your live file, so it should be editable. What I mean when I say one outlined Illustrator file, which is the next component that you've got to submit, is making sure that none of the text is live. Now, the easiest way to do this is to go to your layers, unlock all of the layers. So every single layer that you've got in your layering hierarchy there, go Command A to select everything, go up to Type, go to Create Outlines, Shift Command 0 if you really want to go for the shortcut. And what that will do is it will turn all your text into outlines, and that includes in your markup panel and your job ticket. And the way that you'll know that everything's been set up so that it's now set to outline is you then go to Type and find Font. And what you'll see is Fonts in Document 0. And that will just indicate that you've outlined every single font in the document. There's no live fonts. So if this was to go to the printer and the printer potentially had corrupted fonts or the fonts that you'd packaged with the file didn't work, then you would need to outline it and provide an outlined version so then that way they can just print it and there's no issues there. So that's outlined Illustrator file. One press ready PDF, preferably make that one from the live Illustrator file. Otherwise you can do that from the outlined Illustrator file, but it's as simple and easy as just going with your final file there. So once you've done all your finished art, you then just go File, Save As, and you would set it up as a Adobe PDF. So in your Dropbox there, you go to your Format, Adobe PDF, and when you go save, what will happen there is it'll bring up this dialog box and you just go press quality. You can go high quality print if you wish, but press quality is also fine. You set that to that default Adobe PDF preset and go save PDF, and that will save it as the press ready PDF version that you need. Now when I say that, I will also be checking to make sure that all the spot colors are set up, because you can do that in Adobe in the Adobe PDF. So you can open it up in Adobe Acrobat Reader and check to see that all the spot colors are active. They've got a similar thing to this separations preview, so I can see what colors have been colored as such. So I'll be checking that. So make sure that you do that, but also make sure that before that you've checked all your die line colors and all that sort of stuff to make sure it's all up to scratch. All links, what will happen is, back a couple of years ago you couldn't actually package an Illustrator file. Now it's very easy. You can just package it like you can an InDesign file. So to do that, you just go to File, Package. And in doing that, what that'll do is it will package your links and your fonts into that folder, as well as this Illustrator file, the final version that you're working with. So the best thing to do would be to make sure that you do that maybe towards the end. And what that can also do to help with is to see whether or not it collects links that you're like, oh, whoops, I didn't know that link was in there. Oh, whoops, I didn't know that font was in there. When you package it, you can check to see for finished art means, have you got unnecessary fonts or linked files in there that you no longer want in there? And you can remove those from the package file and resave the document or repackage the document without those links. So it's a good way to even screen for your finished art if you need to. And also all fonts, as I said, you'll see all your fonts will be packaged accordingly. So you'll see all your fonts packaged with regards to the ones that are used in the document. So that's everything for your food. Non-food is pretty much exactly the same. There's just a couple of things that aren't included, such as the best before, use by date in the die line. Generally speaking, you don't need it. Some products might need it, but again, just check your original existing pack to see whether or not you need a best before. There's nothing else additional that needs to be added there. It's all the same. Front of pack, same pretty much. So same sort of elements there. Back of pack, again, same elements, except you've got less to include because you don't need your nutritional information panel. You might need ingredients or contents if you're doing something like shampoo or something that still has a lot of elements that need to be mentioned. So again, check your existing pack. I stress this because I say that they've got it right. So making sure that you're following that existing pack as much as possible makes it easier for you to know if you need to include something. If you don't need to include something, ask me via email or in person and we can determine whether or not it's necessary. And then finished art, again, is identical. There's some things you might not need, but most of it is exactly the same. It refers to the different sections in terms of the file structure, your coloring, your text, and your pixel graphics, as well as all your submission details. So I don't need to really go through the non-food elements. It's just got a few things that aren't necessary, that are necessary for the food. So at least here you've got an abridged checklist for your sake. Now another thing that I also had, that I do have set up on the blackboard is this thing. It's the finished art do's and don'ts. Now, a lot of this stuff I've gone through, but I thought that I'd go through it again just to reiterate to you the importance of ensuring that you have checked your file. So with your glue area, include the glue panels with a new colored swatch. In our case, we're not using the dashed lines. You can if you want to, but you need to make sure that you check the pattern so that the magenta lines are actually set to a spot color and aren't just a pattern, because that's really important that they're spot colored. Otherwise, the best and easiest method that I'd say go for is to ensure that you do it with a solid magenta box to indicate the full glue area. And also make sure it's set to overprint. Don't forget to add the glue panel. So don't just indicate that there's like a white area there, but there's no actual glue spot color. Make sure that you add that glue panel in there as well. So spot colored and the white if you need it. Again, I've gone over this, but I'll just reiterate the whole difference between the spot colors. So include the spot colors that are used in your design only. So at least on this version of the markup panel, so if you remember back to the first part of this finished art tutorial, that the spot colors on the easier one are indicated just by these two boxes, whereas on this other markup panel, you've got the design spot colors up here, and then you've got your die line spot colors down there. So make sure that if you're using spot colors in your design, you indicate them in this area on this spot color. If you're not using on this markup panel, so in this case, this student's got two spot colors in their design, and if they haven't, they've just indicated it with nothing. So they've got nothing in there. It's just two boxes. And then down on this one, you'd indicate your design spot colors here or your die line spot colors there. And don't forget to include all of them. So make sure that you add the additional ones and change these ones to indicate the colors they are. So the die cut and folds that's already here is cyan, and the glue area would be a solid magenta color, and then include all the other spot colors you've included for your die line. Don't put the die line colors in this spot color section. So this is critical information area spot color. This is your glue area, and these are the measurements. These are wrong, so they're in the wrong area. If you were using this markup panel, you'd put them down the bottom here. But if you're using this markup panel here, you wouldn't even put them in. They don't go anywhere. It's just implied. So you would only put them in if you're including them in your design and not as part of the die line colors. With your best before, Make sure that you set up that new green spot color if you need the best before spot color. On these particular screenshots that I've taken of past student work, they've needed it because they've done food products. A lot of the time, the non-food products don't need it. Sometimes they do. Just check your existing pack to see if it needs it. If it needs it, put it in there as a white panel with the best before written there, and then indicate somewhere on that panel using the green spot color where the spot color is. As you can see on these ones here, they've indicated the whole panel as the spot color where they want to stamp the best before or use by date. And then make sure you set that one to overprint. You can see that it's been done here because it looks like the best before text is white, but then when the green goes over the top, it obviously multiplies or adds that overprint look through it. Don't forget to add the best before panel if you've got best before on yours. Don't just add the white panel. If you've added the white panel just like this, or on the example that I was using in the other part of the tutorial, she forgot to obviously include the green section of it. Just make sure that you include the green section. So follow these ones up here, not this one down here, and don't type the date in. So don't put best before and then the date, because then that will be on the design artwork. And I might have explained this in class to some of you, but by printing it in there, that means the box has a use by date as well. So as soon as this date pops up, that means all those boxes have to be thrown out. By indicating it with this green area, it gets stamped afterwards, which means these boxes have an infinite life. They can live forever. They don't have a use by date, because if it said it after this, then you'd have to actually replace that with a sticker over the top or something like that. So it would be a bit of a waste of money. With the positional barcodes, make sure that you leave the positional only and the magnification on the barcode. So I showed and introduced you to these barcodes back when we were doing the back of pack week. Make sure that you insert it as it is. So don't delete this middle positional only section. Keep the percentage that it's magnified by, the positional only section, as well as inserting the EAN number in there that's on your existing pack. So the barcode number that's on your existing pack, include that where it says EAN number and then the series of zeros, put it in there. Put it on its own layer and also add the quiet zone. So you can see on this that this student, if you remember back to the first part of this finished art tutorial, I was saying that you need to have the offset path there. So at least 1 to 3 millimeters of white around the edge. So it won't insert like that when you copy it across from that file that I put on the blackboard. You'll need to add your own offset path there. So don't alter the size of the barcode at all. Insert the size as the magnification that you want it to be. So that's why there are multiple magnifications. So I think it goes from 80% all the way up to 170%. One of those is bound to fit. If it's any more smaller than 80%, it runs the risk of not being scannable. So make sure if you want to have the minimum, do it at 80% with the 13-digit one. Don't change the size of it just because your pack is smaller. If it's smaller, speak to me before you do any changes, and then we can have a discussion about whether or not you want to decrease the size in any way. Don't remove the positional only panel. So you can see here on this student work that they've deleted the positional only panel. You can do it when you're printing the mock-up, so just for like the mock-up file, if you want to print it without it on there, just so that it looks more professional when you do that mock-up, that's fine. But for the Illustrator file that you're creating, that you're going to be giving to the printer, like the hypothetical printer, keep it on there. It just lets the printer know exactly what they need to replace. And don't type in the numbers of your barcode in this section down the bottom. In using this one, type it into the section that says EAN number where the zeros are, but not down the bottom. Not down the bottom where those zeros are. Just the positional only panel there. With your measurements, leave the measurements on the finished art file. Don't delete them. Make sure you've measured everything. So if you've already spoken to me early on, this would have been back in the die line class. Those of you that were curious to know, inquisitive to know about whether or not you'd done too many or too few measurements, we've already discussed this. So a lot of you will have already done the measurements, and the way that you've done them should be fine. make sure that if you do set your measurements, so say I know that some of you in your die line had your measurement lines over the top of your artwork. So some of you measured panels over the top of where your artwork would go. If you've done that, really important to make sure that it's set to overprint, because otherwise that will print onto the design. So you'll have these really crappy looking measurement lines, and the measurement actually indicated on the pack when really you don't want to see that at all. So don't leave the measurements off the finished art file, so don't forget to put them on there. If I've mentioned in your feedback on the die line that you needed to include the measurements, make sure you chuck them on there for your finished art file. And don't just put the measurement in there without the line. So you can see here that I've just got this floating measurement that was screenshotted from one student's work that just had the measurement nearest to where that panel was. Now, logic has it that obviously, you know, it's simple. You can see where the width is and where the height is of something. So I can understand that some of you may want to just avoid putting the lines in there. However, we want to make sure that the printer knows clearly and concisely what the measurement is, where it corresponds to, and it can be done this way by using that line to put it into place. So make sure you include the lines with the measurements, and always make sure they're millimeters as well. The critical print area, have it dashed or dotted if you want to, and make sure it's set to overprint. So don't have a solid line. So you can see here that I've screenshotted this particular student's work who has set it to a solid red line instead of the dashed line as this student has up here. Or have it the same color as the die line. So you can see here this student has done a solid blue line, which obviously is our cyan cut line, and set it to a solid line, which means that would cut out, and you don't want that at all. That would turn the job into a set of jigsaw pieces that wouldn't actually fit together. So make sure it's set to the red, and make sure that it's set to the red spot color that we set up in our die line tutorial week. Make sure that it's set to a dashed or dotted line, and make sure that it's set to overprint. And that's it. So those were just some additional extras that I included just because I thought that it was important to cover a few things that in the past have been confused. But hopefully with these two tutorials that you've got here, you'll be able to do this perfectly. Now another thing that I'll mention just before you guys print is how to set up your mock-up print file. It's going to be a lot different to your finished art file, but for now, for your finished art, if you're getting to those stages where you're ready for this and your work is ready to add your front of pack and your back of pack and to lay it all out and properly set it up for finished art, follow these two parts tutorials. And you should be perfect. You'll get full marks. And I've made it even easier again by ensuring that you've got something such as this checklist here. So if you follow through this checklist, you follow through this tutorial, you follow them all, and you make sure that you listen up to everything I had to say here, you'll get full marks for your finished art, and you'll pass with flying colours. So hopefully this helps, and if you need any additional information, you can email me with any requests, or we can catch up potentially when you get back from your break. Awesome guys, speak soon.